I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him.
Moves to this far right corner. As he does, he's going to climb off the edge and then drop down to the ground. As he did that, he left some palm impressions. There's some smudges, some places we're looking to collect DNA. There's a shoe imprint where we believe the suspect is clearly identified as wearing Converse tennis shoes. Replay that again so you can get another view of that.
The FBI have released brand new surveillance footage of Charlie Kirk's shooter's getaway in broad daylight on foot. TMZ have also released footage showing the alleged shooter before the incident walking with a limp, possibly because he was concealing the rifle in his jeans.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is also the channel that covered the Thomas Crooks incident. It's very clear from new footage released that Charlie Kirk's shooter does appear to be of college age. The real question is whether he was attending college, and more specifically, was he attending college at Utah College? He certainly seemed particularly au fait with the layout, not only in executing his mission with a single shot, but also in making a getaway in the day, apparently without being seen by anyone. Well, certainly not as far as we know, or so far. In a sense, the unknown shooter has done a far better job, well, if one can call it that, than Brian Koberger did in covering his tracks, because the Charlie Kirk shooter had no getaway vehicle to trace, was not seen by anyone fleeing the scene, well, not up close. So far, there don't seem to be any cell phone breadcrumbs to follow. On that third point, it does look like a cell phone-sized object jammed into the shooter's right jean pocket, doesn't it? Now, before we give the shooter too many kudos in comparison to Koberger, and I don't mean to compliment him in any way, because what we're trying to do is assess how clever he is and the degree of strategy in his criminal psychology, and that'll determine how easy or hard, how short or how long it will take to catch him. So in this sense, we should also note, unlike Koberger, the Charlie Kirk shooter actually was captured on camera at the scene. Unlike Koberger, where the murder weapon wasn't found, the shooter deliberately left the murder weapon, a high-powered hunting rifle, near the scene. Now, in the clip provided by the FBI and cited by The Guardian, Utah officials seem to suggest that they may have the shooter's DNA based on where he slid down the roof of one of the campus buildings. That's possible, but not a given. In terms of my own profile, I would say the shooter is pretty smart, smarter than Koberger. I also think the shooter was influenced by Trump shooter Thomas Crooks, who also seemed to communicate something via footage of his T-shirt. Remember this picture of Thomas Crooks? Well, the Charlie Kirk shooter also had an American flag on his shirt. Meanwhile, at the incident, Crooks wore a T-shirt with Demolition Ranch insignia, a merch item related to a YouTuber of the same name. Now consider the following. Did Charlie Kirk's shooter mean to be seen, possibly like Luigi Mangione, and wanted to make a political statement like Luigi Mangione? But unlike Trump shooter Thomas Crooks, who we covered on this channel, this shooter didn't intend to be killed while committing the act. Since the shooter used a hunting rifle, I think a good place to start an indirect investigation might be stores selling that weapon, local stores, as well as hunting clubs in that area of Utah. Also, asking fellow hunters to pay special attention to the weapon. So perhaps visuals of the weapon will be released next. And who knows, perhaps a relative will recognize it. It's also interesting that Crooks used a bicycle to get to the event. From the video footage, one wonders how the Charlie Kirk shooter ultimately left the scene. I mean, after disappearing into the woods. And we do have a map, courtesy of Rick Bindhammer, just showing the fastest route into this wooded area. What do you think? Does this suggest we are dealing with a local? I do think it's interesting that he could have used that parking lot that's right there. But of course, if he did, well, the vehicle could have been traced and tracked. And so the fact that he elected not to do that is definitely quite interesting. So from the video footage, one wonders how the Charlie Kirk shooter ultimately left the scene. I mean, after disappearing into the woods. Did he have a vehicle, or does he live nearby, or both? Although Kirk's shooter meant to be seen, he also meant not to be seen. On the roof, his dark clothing meant he was disguised by the dark paneling which you see from the side view. Unlike Crooks, no one appeared to see the Kirk shooter on the roof until he fired the shot. But I do think the Kirk shooter knew he was likely to be seen generally and by CCTV after the fact, and so he dressed accordingly, like a patriot.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job. We worked with the local police, the governor. Everybody did a great job.
It's not clear what Kirk shooter's politics are at this point, but if I could hazard a guess, I'd say he's anti-Trump and anti-Republican. What is very concerning is how divided America is right now. And if one considers the timeline, just 3 months ago, a Minnesota Democratic state lawmaker and his wife were killed in a targeted attack. This is from FT.com. Pennsylvania's Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro was also attacked this year. Last year, of course, Trump survived several assassination attempts. And then there was also the very brazen, also caught on CCTV, Luigi Mangione incident. Now, I'm not even in America. I've been to America several times, but it's clear that this is a very important moment for America. Sigmund Freud famously said, civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock. In The Matrix, Neo is about to react in a huff when Trinity says,
"You know that road. You know exactly where it ends. And I know that's not where you want to be."
No, it isn't. When we cast rocks or bullets instead of words, mark my words, that is the end of civilization. And that's not a road any of us want to be on either. We may be on that road, but we can easily just stop and go another route. We also know where this journey ends and leads, where we elect to pick up a rock instead of using words and reason and all that sort of thing. Please don't take civil society, all that we have built up for granted, just based on ego and ideology, which is, after all, just how strongly we feel about things. Feelings change. Things change. So simmer down, people. Be patient and kind. And that's harder to do than taking the path of least resistance. What's the path of least resistance? Frustration and anger and animus. Instead, be slow to anger. What did Yoda say?
Hate leads to suffering.
But what leads to hate? Anger. And what leads to anger? Fear. So control your fear, control your anger, and perhaps confront people with words who are being fearful, who are showing anger and hatred. Those in the true crime community know, or should know, that taking a life under any circumstances outside of a war footing is a crime. And now the question is whether civil morality and respect for the rule of law is under threat. There's a lot of desensitivity going on, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to be desensitized, right? We have more information at our disposal than ever. We've got technologies that ought to set us free, that are enslaving many of us instead, but the choice is ours. We have the choice to continue using words to broker the world we want. When you start to doubt and question institutions like the justice system, like the media, like law enforcement, well, we can do so with words. Once we lose words, and that's what the law is. The law is words, rules, codes of conduct. There was a time where kings, when they died, chaos followed. And so someone came up with the idea of, well, instead of having law and order related to a specific person, and cults of personality, well, what happens when that person dies? Well, then you have chaos. So someone came up with the idea of, why don't we write these down, and instead of listening to a person who can come and go, we all stick to these rules. And that created the civilization that we live in today. Second guessing that, throwing that away, we do at our own peril. Once we lose words, and as I say, that's what the law is, we are naked. we are all barbarians. So is everyone else. That's not a kind of world that we want to live in. So tread carefully, folks. Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. If you do want me to continue my analysis and coverage of this ongoing manhunt, subscribe to the channel, show your support. You can hit the thanks button. Keep calm, take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you guys next time.